Hi, guys. That's nice. Thanks for coming out. Where to begin? Oh, do I have a copy of the book by any chance?
Oh, okay.
Thanks. So anyway, thank you for coming out. That's it's really nice. I've been traveling around a bit, meeting people in all over the country, really, and it's fantastic. And it's really interesting to see how people live up to or not live up to the sort of cliches about where they live. So anyway, it's interesting. So thank you. You people exceed everything, so don't worry. It's all good in that regard. Anyway, so I'm glad I didn't hear that. Anyhow, so I'm here. Yeah, I'm in a bookstore about this book, which is it's a young adult novel, and I have to confess that I am an accidental YA author, which I suppose I should have expected that coming from seeing that I made why most of you are here. In fact, 30 years ago, my livelihood being in YA cinema, and then to spend my whole life running from it, and then to turn around at a certain point and go, oh, you know what, it's okay back there, and go back into it. So, but anyway, I'm an accidental YA author in the sense that I was writing, I thought I was writing this book. I started about 7-8 years ago writing what was going to be the great American novel, and another one, right? And about a man who had a one-night indiscretion, one-night affair, and a baby came out of it, and he didn't tell anyone in his family, so he kept this child out of wedlock a secret. And it was really a book, an attempt to be a book about marriage over a long period of time and secrecy, and how secrecy corrodes and builds up walls, and eventually, no matter how wonderful, whatever you happen to be, the more secrets we have, the more these things are in our way and prevent us and slowly destroy our intimacy and whatnot. So I was writing this great American novel for, like I said, 7-8 years, and I just couldn't crack it. I seemed to be the only one to think it was any good, and even I wasn't even so sure. I'd never really shown it to anyone. But my favorite character in it was always their 15-year-old daughter, who was 15 in this great American novel for about 20 pages or so. And whenever I would get to that 20 pages, rewriting it the umpteenth time, I would get to that part and I go, oh, that part's so good, I don't need to rewrite that. And I would carry on. And then one day, I was sitting on an airplane, and I just opened my computer, and I said, my dad has this kid across town. What's that about? I was like, huh. And suddenly I was writing the same story from the 15-year-old girl's point of view. And what I had struggled with, and what had taken me, like I say, years to do, suddenly started flowing out in this really exciting way to me. And I probably wrote for 100 pages before I admitted to myself that what I was doing was writing this YA book, and I knew instantly that it was the YA genre as opposed to an adult book, in that there's something about YA that I find really exciting in that sort of, and I didn't know at the time that most of YA readers are actually adults. But I think that's interesting. It's the same way that those same people still love Pretty in Pink 30-odd years later, because it's about that moment in life. I think the way those movies were about that moment in life when we just sort of wake up and our life is our own for the first time, and I'm feeling this way. No one has ever felt this before. No one understands me. No one appreciates me. No, I am alone in the world, and I've got to get through and make that dress to go to this dance, and but I mean, and that's why that movie, which is really, that's what that movie's about. And it's a lovely movie, Pretty in Pink, but let's face it, it's not Gone with the Wind or The Godfather or something, you know what I mean? But people cherish that movie because it captures, in a very honoring way, that moment in life when we are first blossoming, and it's my life, and it's not yours, and I alone am going to live it, and I alone am responsible, and and that's an exciting moment in life, and I think we never sort of that pitches us toward where we're going to, a lot of our trajectory for the rest of our life in a certain way, and we hold that moment in time very dear, which is why people continue to hold Pretty in Pink and those kind of movies very dear to them. And in a certain way, it's very interesting because I am the grateful recipient of a lot of that affection, but really I feel like it has nothing to do with me in a certain way. I'm just this talisman, and it's people pouring out that affection on that youthful part of themselves that they have such fond recollection for when they were just beginning, and just, oh, I was just starting, and that kind of feeling. And like I say, it has nothing to do with me in a very real way, but it's very real for them, and it's a lifelong, it's cherished. Anyway, so I was, and so I think why YA is actually read by adults in a certain way too is when you're 15, 16 and you're right in the midst of this, you can read something that's very YA and it's talking about emotions in that direct way, and you're like, yeah, that's how I am, yeah, it's us against the world. But when you're 40 or 50, and we can look back and kind of go, oh yeah, and in that place of knowing it's okay, I'll come through. But when you're that age, you don't know you're going to come through. I remember when I was 15, looking in the mirror, just praying to whatever, going, please let me just know what I'm going to look like in 10 years, just for a second, so I know it's going to be okay, and I'm going to get through this. Because I looked like I was 12 when I was 15, 16, 17, and I just wanted to know that I was going to get through this, and something else was going to happen, As much as I was the center of the world, I was still waiting for my life to begin in a certain way at that age. So, anyhow, so I was writing this thing for about 100 pages till I finally accepted to myself that what I was writing was a novel about a 15-year-old girl who finds out she has a brother living across town, and not about a marriage. And nothing in the two books turns out to be the same, except for the inciting incident of this kid who's not in our family, who I'm related to. I describe it as if the other book were this big tree that crashed in the woods and died and became a nurse tree, if any of you know your woodsy stuff. And this other tree, this little book just grew out of it and sucked all the nutrients out of that big dead tree. And because I knew nothing in the story is the same, like I say, except the inciting incident of this kid. But I knew all the family, I knew the dynamics in the family, I knew the town they lived in, so I knew everything about them. That world had been living in my head for years, like I said. So anywhere Lucy decided to sort of take me, I was, oh, I've been in this part of town before. Oh yeah, that. So the plot's entirely different, and what happens is very different. But I was very familiar with the world, and so that was really very exciting to me. And so once like I say, I wrote about 100 pages, and once I finally fessed up to myself, I'm writing a YA book, and it's about a 15-year-old girl. Damn it. And we'll get to why it makes me think I can talk like a 15-year-old girl in a minute. But anyway, the minute I got to that point in myself, I just dried up and couldn't think of another thing to say, of course. And I let it alone. I just walked away from it, and I did other things. I have other day jobs, so I did those. And I was walking down the street again one day, and I went, oh, I know what happens. She gets on a bus. And it was the only time I've ever written anything. In my other life, I'm a travel writer, so I've been doing that for 15 years or so. And that's a very different kettle of fish, But this was the only time I'd ever been writing anything where I would start the sentence and not know where it was going to end in the sentence. And I would just sort of step out on, and so she got on a bus. Wow. Okay, and if she got on the bus, then she's going to New York City with $6 in her pocket. And it just sort of, I just followed. The only thing I did right in the book was I followed where Lucy took me. And I understood, having been an actor and TV director and sort of worked in storytelling and creative type things for 30 odd years, the only thing I've started to learn is I understand a bit process and what process is, and being lost in the woods for a long time is actually okay and part of the process. I remember hearing John, not that long ago, a couple years while I was writing this, it was very helpful. John Cleese, the great English comedian who's in Fawlty Towers and Monty Python. And someone was interviewing him about how Monty Python did all these great things, and he wrote the best things that Monty Python did. And he said, well, thank you, but I wasn't the smartest person in the room, which I found difficult to believe because I thought John Cleese is pretty brilliant, but I wasn't the smartest person in the room or the funniest, but I was the one who was willing to be uncomfortable and not know for the longest. So people who are very smart and agile and facile just grab solutions and fix it. Okay, there it is. It's about a funny walk, and that's it. And he would go, no, wait, what about this? And what about that? So his solutions and his comedy, he thought was often the funniest because he was willing to be in the weeds longer than anybody else. And I thought that, for anybody dealing with process, is I heard that and I said, I'll take that. Really valuable. Because, of course, when you're in the weeds in life and anywhere, it can just seem like, my God, I'm in the weeds, and how am I ever going to get out? So anyway, this was, I suppose, the best example in my life, for me, where I just trusted process. I had no idea what business did I have writing about a 15-year-old female, and I had no idea where the book was going. And yet, there I was. And when I finally finished the book, I looked up from my bubble. I often inflict my writing on my wife at certain points along the way, and she's like, oh, more? But anyway, I didn't do this. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. I just was messing around. It was my own little thing. Me and Lucy were having this little relationship here of her world. I was eavesdropping in, so I didn't tell anyone about the whole thing. And then I gave it to my neighbor, a 15-year-old young lady, and I said, would you read this? And don't tell your parents. And she said, yeah, what is it? And I go, just read it. And so she read it and said, this sounds just like me and my friends who wrote it. I was like, I did, So anyway, so that was a huge relief to me once she said that. And people have asked, how does some 54-year-old dude think he can talk from a 15-year-old girl's point of view? And I just point to Madame Bovary. And I suppose the example I use is it's a bit like acting with an accent or something that, you start using this accent and suddenly you're saying words that you might not normally say, and you start walking or twisting in a little different way, and you're hiding behind this thing, and yet you're not hiding behind it. It's allowing a great openness because you're slightly protected by her. I have a friend of mine, a wonderful travel writer and novelist, Pico Iyer, I'm sure a lot of you know. He said, I wrote this travel memoir several years ago, and he said, what are you writing now? And I said, I'm working on this novel. And he said, oh, good. Now you can put in all the things that were too personal to put in your memoir. And I thought that was just brilliant. And that's exactly sort of what happens here in many ways. I think no matter how old we get, or me anyway, I can still feel completely alone, completely misunderstood, completely unappreciated, and no one else understands and sees things the way I see them. And what's the matter with everybody else? Hopefully what I've gained in all these years since I was this age was that grown-up voice going, no, Andrew, you probably are appreciated, you're probably being a little self-pitying now. And, I can parent myself a bit. But when you're 15 and all, you can't. You're just right out there with it. So it was great liberating feeling to just be right out there with these kind of feelings of someone whose world is turned upside down, and how do they make it okay? And so that was a bit of how this came into being. And I thought, being it's a book reading, I should probably read. I'll read one brief passage, because at one point Lucy finds love, or her first experience with love. And everybody in the book is, of course, me. And that doesn't sound narcissistic in any way, right? But it is. It's sort of, the way you're everybody, because it's just alchemy. You just turn that part of yourself down and that part of yourself up, and that part and that. It's just like acting is the same thing. It's just alchemy. Like I recently acted for the first time in a number of years. Last year I was in a television show and I played this pedophile. It was this, horrible guy, of course, and yet people go, how could you do that? I go, it's just sort of it's alchemy. You turn down these kind of, everybody has secrets and these kind of things, and you just, anyway, although I don't go there. Maybe that wasn't the best diversion to take in this. I feel like Sean Spicer right now. Anyway. Anyhow, gracefully moving back. So anyway, everybody's me in the book, except for the guy that Lucy falls in love with. He just came out of nowhere, out of left field. He reminds me of no one I know. He doesn't have any of the traits of anyone I know, and I just fell absolutely in love with him, like Lucy did, because he was a complete surprise to me, and so that was a real delight. Anyway, this is a short passage of the first time they run into each other in public. Before long, it started to rain. I hadn't noticed it getting cloudy. Simon did not have an umbrella, and needless to say, neither did I. I don't think I've ever carried an umbrella in my life. I've always just gotten wet and soggy, but in this particular case, it not only didn't matter, it just made things better. We were completely soaked within a few minutes. When I looked over at Simon, his hair was all stringy and hanging down over his beautiful face. His brow was scrunched up. He must have felt me looking at him, because he turned to me, then he smiled. It was his big, goofy smile. It was in that instant that I knew I was in love with Simon. I smiled back, and we kept walking. At the next corner, we had to stop to let a car pass, and when we stepped out into the street, our hands just came together, our fingers wrapped around each other's. After a while, we started to swing our hands back and forth just a little bit with our walking. Then we swung them really far forward and back, up and down, then all the way around in a giant circle. Then we started laughing. The rain kept coming down. We could not have gotten any more wet. It was, without question, the happiest moment of my life. When we finally got to the corner where I would turn off toward my house, we stopped. I looked up into his eyes. "See you tomorrow," he said. "See you tomorrow." He leaned down to kiss me, right there, on the street corner, in public. Anyway, so that's one of Lucy's few happy moments. My family always says to me when I read something, someone at an event not long ago asked me, like, what's my edit process? Do I read aloud? And I said, I don't generally read aloud to myself because, as my family says, I always sound like I'm trying to be Raymond Chandler detective when I read out loud, like some 1940s gumshoe when dames were dames and men were men. And so even when I'm reading a 15-year-old girl, I'm trying to sound like so I don't read it aloud. Although I do print it up because I think it's things are very different on a printed page than they are on the computer screen, as much as we want to save the trees, of course. But anyhow, that's a bit of how the book came to being. And people have asked me a little bit, and then I guess we could do a few questions, and people have asked me often, how does some actor become a writer, and then to this. And I'll just back up, and then I have to back up to give you the whole big story. When I was 15 years old, I was cut from the basketball team, and my mom said, "Andrew, dear, why don't you try out for the play?" And I'm like, I don't want to try out for the play. I want to be the point guard. And so anyway, I tried out for the play, and I was cast as the Artful Dodger in Oliver. And since none of you were there, I can tell you that I was absolutely fantastic. And I was, in a very real way, because when I walked down on stage for the first time, Tennessee Williams, the great American playwright, has a line talking about love in Streetcar Named Desire. He said, "It was as if a room that had always been half in shadow was suddenly in the light." And that's how I felt about myself the second I walked on stage. I just felt like, oh, there I am, in a way that I had never known I wasn't there until that moment when I was there. I was like, oh, there I am. And I knew it was a hugely important moment in my life because I told no one. And just the way when I was writing this, I told no one. It was just important. It was just like, I told no one because it was like a little flame had been lit inside me, and anybody could have walked by and gone and blown it out, because it was real frail and vulnerable. So I just kept it to myself. But I knew in that instant, this is what I'm doing with my life. I had no idea how or anything like that, or how any of that was going to be achieved, because I was 15 years old, much like Lucy. I love moments in life where we're going here and something happens and now we're going here, and this is where life is going. And we had no idea when we woke up this morning that everything was going to change. But anyway, I knew in that moment, that I had that feeling of, oh, there I am. And, and then 20 years later, I was walking, so then I did that. And that's what I did. And then 20 years later, I was walking across Spain. I'd read a book about a guy who walked across the old Camino de Santiago, which is this ancient pilgrim's route across the north of Spain, where back in the 8th century, if you walked across it, you got half your time in purgatory knocked off. It was a big deal, 12 centuries ago. And anyway, I was walking across Spain, and I had been doing it for weeks and weeks, and I hated it. I was miserable. I was completely unhappy. It was the worst experience I'd ever had in my life. I would have gone home, except I'd bragged to all my friends that I was going to walk across Spain, and I couldn't, so I couldn't go home. So anyway, one day I fell down, and I dropped to my knees, and I started weeping, and I had a huge tantrum. I just had a meltdown. And I was screaming up at God in the heavens, all the things that my good Catholic upbringing would tell me I would go to hell for. Anyway, I had this complete tantrum. And when it was done, my limousine didn't pick me up. I had to keep walking. Anyway, so I kept walking, and as I was walking, I felt like I'd forgotten something. I was like, what? I forgot. What is it? And anyway, I kept walking, and then I took a little break, and I was sitting there by the side of a barn, and I suddenly realized, it was this realization sort of bubbled up slowly from within, that I realized what I'd forgotten, what I didn't have, what I was missing. What I'd always had was fear. This feeling, this deep feeling of just abiding fear. And don't worry, we're not going to get all Oprah on it or anything, and I had no idea that fear was such a constant companion to me until that moment of its first absence. I just was, and again, in that moment in the wheat field in Spain, I felt like, oh, there I am. There I am, the same way that I felt when I was 15 when I walked out on stage to do that. So I began to travel more, and then I began to write about travel because I had the exact same sensation. One day, I was in Saigon and traveling, and this kid walked by me, he drove past me on a scooter, and he said, hop on, I'll give you a ride. I'm like, leave me alone. He goes, no, I'll give you a ride. Leave me alone. I'll give you a ride. Anyway, he wasn't going anywhere. So I hopped on his scooter and he gave me a ride. And I spent the day with him. And he drove me to all these places like where his mother used to do their gardening, where his father had been arrested. It was like his world. And when he dropped me back at my hotel that night, I went up into my hotel room and I wrote down what happened. I'm an actor, right? I've said so much bad dialogue. I know good dialogue when I hear it, so I wrote down the dialogue. I knew intuitively sort of story arc because that's what I'd been doing for so many years. So anyway, I wrote down the story of what happened. And again, I finished that, and I went, oh, there I am. I think I even said it out loud to myself alone in the room. I thought, there I am. And just like the time when I was 15, like the time in the wheat field that started me traveling, and then this moment when I wrote this down. I'd never been a writer. I'd never read books. I didn't read, and I don't think I read a book till I was 30. I shouldn't say that in a bookstore, of course. But I didn't read in high school. I don't know what I was doing. No young people should hear this. But I don't think I read any of the books I was supposed to read. I never wrote. I had no interest in writing. But the minute I sat down and I wrote that down, I went, oh, there I am. I went, huh. That's a surprise. But I've had one ability in life, which is to recognize important little moments like that when they go by and just pry a wedge right in them and just sort of pry them open and try and crawl in there. Because I have no skills, really. I'm just sort of someone who's lived by intuition. So whenever those aha, there I am moments have happened in my life, I've just crawled into those little crevices and tried to exploit them. And so I became a travel writer, and I became successful at it fairly quickly because, for two reasons. Underneath every story I wrote was this feeling that travel's important. It'll change your life. It changed mine. It can change yours. And, my soapbox is that, if Americans traveled more, the world would be a very, very different place. Mark Twain has that famous line, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. I think that says it all. I think if Americans went and looked for themselves and came back, the world would just be different. In a very real way, I often say, I'm out to change the world one travel story at a time. Because if one person reads a story and goes, I'm going there, and they've never gone anywhere, and they come back, they affect their family, and it's like a ripple going out in a pool. And I think, travel's a potent tool for community. And the other thing I knew right away was tell me a story, don't sell me a destination. And by that, I mean, I'll tell you one quick story of what I mean by that. My wife wanted to go on vacation, and she said, why don't you get a story in Tahiti? I'm like, okay. And wanting a happy life, I said, I better get a story in Tahiti. So I can't call up my editor and say, Keith, my wife wants to go to Tahiti. And he's not going to go, Andy, great, bring me back 3,000 words on that. So that's not going to happen. So I went on the internet, in about 5 minutes, you can see that 95% of the world's black pearls are farmed in Tahiti. And I went, oh, that's interesting. Huh. Right around then, my mom had a birthday. I called her up. I said, Mom, do you like pearls? And she said, oh yes, dear, pearls are lovely. So I called my editor and go, Keith, I was talking to my mom. She's got a big birthday coming up. And when I asked her what she wanted, she got a faraway look in her eye. And she said, Andrew, dear, I once remember seeing a single black pearl hanging from a strand. I've never forgotten it. So, Keith, good son that I am, I'm not going to go to Tiffany. I'm going to get on a plane. I'm going to fly halfway around the world to the remote Tuamotu archipelago. I'm going to find a pearl farmer who's going to let me dive down 10 meters under the sea, yank the oyster from the bed, bring it up onto the beach, slice that sucker open, and pluck my mother's pearl dripping wet from the sea and bring it on home to her for her birthday. And he couldn't get me on the plane fast enough to write that story. So Tahiti gets sold. They buy advertising in the magazine. My wife gets her vacation. My mom gets her pearl. Everybody's a winner. And although I've never seen my mom wear her pearl. And but that's what I mean by just sort of tell me a story, don't sell me. And so somewhere along the line, when I was doing all that travel writing, I began that great American novel that we talked about that fell in the woods and became this young adult novel. And I've over-talked my time, so if anyone had a question and or comment, anything goes, don't worry. You can talk all about Molly if you like. Anyway, so if anyone had a question or anything, that would be great and fine. Or if not, I'll just keep going, or we can stop. Hi. Talk loud, I'm deaf. Thank you.
Who are some of your favorite authors and why?
Well, Paul Theroux's books changed my life. Paul Theroux's travel books changed my life. Someone gave me the old Patagonian Express, years ago, and that's why I started traveling. So his books changed my life. And I met Paul through, I got to interview him once for something, and I told him that, and he said, of course they did. You know, being Paul through, that's sort of... I'm a very big fan of this Canadian writer named Alistair MacLeod, who is from Cape Breton in Nova Scotia, and he just writes about simple little stories about Cape Breton. And I've been to Cape Breton once. I am not Canadian. It's about coal mining and all these kinds of things, and Scottish heritage, which I'm not. But there is something about the sort of endless layers of humanity and family ivy that I find. And he wrote only one novel and 2 books of short stories, and I thought he was quite amazing. You know, this book, for as much as it's a book about a 15-year-old girl and trying to reconcile this brother that she never knew about in her, is very much a father-son sort of story, and sort of the sins of the father. You know, it's that notion of that we pass down these things to our kids that we don't even know we're passing down, and they certainly don't know, and yet they've got it on them. You know, Bruce Springsteen, I'm from New Jersey, so Bruce Springsteen, and he has a line about, if I had one wish for you kids, it's that your sins would be your own. You know, and I think that's such a beautiful, powerful theme. The things I started to find out about my father right before he died explains so much. Just the tiny little tip of the iceberg that I never learned about when he was, and I was not interested in, when he was alive and I was young. But that kind of stuff and seaweed that we just pass down to our kids, I think is, and like Lucy goes looking for answers about her father and she ends up not knowing where she's going. I'm a great believer in escape. I find escape to be a valuable thing. I don't think escape is running away. I always find escape to be a running toward something. I may not know what it is I'm running toward while I'm escaping until I run smack into it, and then I go, oh, that's why I left home. You know, that's why I became a travel writer in many ways, because it was like the university of my life. When I would find what I was looking for on the road and you know, Lucy does the same thing. She escapes home. She just sort of, without even knowing it, goes on this journey, this impromptu journey, looking for answers, and she runs smack into the answers that she was, you know, trying to locate in the most unlikely place. But those 2 men influenced my thinking a lot. Anyway, any other one?
Hi. Hey, you said you kept this all to yourself when you wrote it. Did you write it in the middle of the night?
No, I mean, luckily my family does not, I can't write it. By then, I have 3 kids, so by the nighttime I'm just like, but, you know, I write enough sort of travel things and things going on that, and it's been old hat enough in my house. It's just, you know, I do kitchen table writing. E.B. White, I think, said that he was very grateful to his family for not providing him with a precious sanctuary to write. He wrote at the kitchen table amidst chaos, and that's my thing. And I just don't, you know, it's, oh, Dad's doing it, you know, whatever. And I can write for 10 minutes, or I can write for hours, you know, and I can be in the bathroom, go, oh, wait, I just have to write something down, and I'll go write it down, and, you know, that kind of thing. So it's, when I'm in trouble is when I'm left alone for 9 hours at home, which rarely happens, but, you know, I spend 8 hours sort of doing nothing, and then I go, oh my God, they're coming home in an hour. Why don't they ever give me any space, you know? And so it was just like that. And it was, you know, because my wife is certainly used to, it's like, you never have to ask an actor if they have a job. They'll always tell you. It's a bit like that. My wife didn't ever have to ask, what are you working on, dear? Because I hear. But in this particular case, again, I suppose it was like the acting. I knew it was frail and like very delicate because it was sort of like on the leading edge of, I never knew where I was going. So I didn't have confidence in it. I just had a belief in it, which is different. You know, so it was just still, it was mine till I had my 15-year-old neighbor read it. And then I was more on pins and needles having my 15-year-old neighbor reading in the 2 weeks it took her to read it, well, like 10 days to pick it up, because I'd see her and go, have you read yet? Not yet, I have finals. I'm like, oh, well, come on. But I was more nervous in that 2 weeks than when editors were reading the book. Anyway, anyone else? Hi.
Did it take you a long time to embrace your place in so many people's hearts from those movies? Did you wrestle with that? Did you think, I'm not that guy, leave me alone?
I didn't think I'm not that guy. I think the simple answer is yes, because I was very young and I didn't understand, you know?
It's about describing it now.
Well, you know, I've lived with it for 30-odd years, you know, so you come to terms with these things, or, I mean, hopefully you do, geez. You know, I mean, because it's a beautiful thing, really, you know? It's like I said, those movies are not the greatest movies, but there's something about them that is just so, I was just up in Chicago and that area, so people were all asking me John Hughes questions, and there's something what I said about, I think, what he captured, he was very open-hearted in those movies, and that he wrote. They really gave young people, respect. And so anyway, it took me, when I was young, I just didn't understand. You didn't think like that when you're young. You just sort of, attention is nice, and yet I was very much, and has never reconciled the sort of no, kind of push me, pull you of success. And I think it altered who I was to become in a very real way. And yet, I don't know what I would have been without it. And yet it's something, it's a strange thing. Fame I think it alters people on a cellular level, in a very real way. And so it's just become part of my life. It's just who I've grown into and having had that with me and part of me. So, but at the time I was young, I didn't know, you don't think like that. I certainly didn't think like that. I just was looking for the next job, And then I'm often a bit introverted and can withdraw, so I found a lot of the attention to me at that point I didn't know how to deal with, so I withdrew, And I didn't have the savvy that a lot of people have now of like how to capitalize this and buy material and develop this and develop that. I was just like, what's the next job? I was much more of a freelancing kid. I didn't come from success, and it wasn't like a Kennedy where I was bred for success and how we now do this and step out onto that. I was just like, wow, that movie was successful? Oh my God, okay, I get another job. It was a bit like that, I'm afraid. Anyhow, hi.
Hi, do you want to talk a little bit about the editing process? Because you talked about this being a very personal project. How did you deal with the editing process?
Well, there was none. I mean, I wrote it and it was perfect. Well, I'll say this. When I gave it to, when my editor, Elise Howard at Algonquin, she bought it and I had a meeting with her and I went to the office. The first thing she said was, "We can fix it." I was like, okay, And then I went home and I told my wife that I don't know why she bought the book. I don't know. And then my wife jokingly, trying to be supportive, trying to find something, she said, well, she liked the title anyway. And she goes, no, she didn't. She wanted to change the title, So I found the editing process my own before I put it out was it was just putting more wedges in things that I'd skipped, just put a little sentence, oh, there's a wedge needs to go in there, that kind of thing. And then once it was bought, my editor had 7, 8 pages of single-spaced notes that I got and was infuriated by, and she was an absolute idiot, and I sold it to the wrong people for a month. In the drawer, I saw that. I don't even think I finished the letter. I'm like, I can't, infuriated. It's like when I do travel writing. Luckily, most of it's done by email now, and you don't have conversations, thank God, because my immediate reaction is defensiveness and fury that you're an idiot and I am a genius. But really, it said, oh my God, I'm terrible. But it's better to feel angry at you than to feel my own insecurities, right? So anyway, I lived with that for a while, and then I slowly started to chip through her notes, and everything she said to me, I think was largely right, except for she sometimes wanted to make Lucy nicer than I wanted to make her. I said she's not likable always, and she's not reliable as a narrator or as a person, and it's very subjective, this, and she's not, I am going to be okay to say this if someone gets angry at this, that she's not likable right now, and I'm going to risk them throwing the book across the room and being done with it. If they are, then they're the wrong person for the book, because it's very much a voice-driven book, So, and she wanted to get rid of one character that I insisted on keeping. Lucy has a younger sister, and she said, get rid of the sister because it'd be better if it's Lucy alone in the family, so she's even more isolated. And I'm like, no, the sister belongs there. And she goes, well, there's no payoff with the sister. There's nothing going. She's just this thing that is underwritten and she's not bringing anything to the table. And I went, okay, well, she will. And so I was rewriting, doing all the notes for over the several months, and I knew I was getting to the end of the book, and the sister was still just on the edges, which the way she was. The sister was very remote. And the sister in very many ways is more like me than any other character, so I didn't want to get rid of her. And yet, because what would that mean? And the way she was in her family is the way I was in my family. It was just sort of on the edge of it, and found this quiet acting thing, and that's what she did, and she just sort of existed out there. She was passing through her family probably on the way to her own life, which is largely how I felt about my adolescence. I think I've changed that feeling now, but that's how I felt at the time. And anyway, so I got near the end of the book, and I was like, oh my God, there's still I've nothing for this, and Elise is going to make me cut her. I've got to find. And then I was writing, and again, one of those things where I was writing, and oh my God, that's what it was. And what her secret came out to me and shocked me, and I was thrilled. And I literally started crying as I was writing, because that's it. And then it turned out, and then Elise, of course, my editor read it and said, okay, you can keep her. Like, but don't, no, come on, more. Don't you love it? And because then, only later did I then realize it was what I'd put in there about why I don't want to spoil it if anybody were to read the book, but she has this late revelation in the book that was something that happened to me, a version-ish happened to me when I was that age, which I had forgotten about. It's such a part of my story, I'd forgotten that it existed. Anyway, so, the circumstances all were very different, but just that sense of secrecy, and everyone having a secret, and everybody makes deals. If there's one secret in the family, there are 5 secrets in a family, because everybody's got to make a deal to keep their version of that secret, even if they don't know it. And that's what was of real interest to me. So the edit process became joyful, started out horrific and resistant. And I felt unappreciated, alone, and all those things we've just been talking about. So that was a bit of a... But my own edit process was, before that, was tentative, because I was afraid to mess with her too much. But I knew it wasn't done when I sold it. I'm a big believer in that last 5% makes things 25% better, for sure, in everything. So I'm a big believer in that, and I knew that it was that last 5% had not been tackled. When I sold it, I just had faith that someone will know that too, and not need a finished, which is what most people want now, is finished, right? I can sell that, done. Anyhow. Was there nothing? Hi.
Maybe this may be the last question.
There it is. I'm getting the hook, sorry.
Do you have a favorite place that you've ever traveled to?
No, I like extreme places. I like Patagonia or the Sahara Desert. That said, I like Rome, and as Audrey Hepburn said, Paris is always a good idea. I like going. I like the idea of movement and propulsion. If I'm not having a good time, I'm like my kids. I need a nap or a snack. You know what I mean? But I'm interested in just about anywhere at least once. And often once is enough. But I do like extreme and remote places, because I like the noise of in the silence, if that makes any sense. Anyway, thank you very much for coming out, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.